If you want to know why Amber Heard's appeal could potentially be dismissed, stay tuned. Hi there, my name is Catherine. I'm a lawyer and I also think differently. Dismissed. Yep, I'll let that sit in. Amber Heard's appeal could be dismissed. I know it's big, right? That's why I wanted to share this with you as soon as I can. And this is based on the filing that they had. And now that I've told you what the big news is, I will explain why Amber Heard's appeal could be dismissed. Okay, so bear with me here because the Court of Appeals in general is very rule-oriented. Everything is based on the rules. So that's why you have to read the rules. I love reading the rules. That's why when I read it, I could not believe what I read. And here's what I'm going to explain to you. First of all, let me give you a background why I think Amber Heard's appeal could be dismissed. First, Virginia Court of Appeals had a new rule that went into effect this year, January 1st, 2022. And the new rule is that one, and I'm simplifying it, obviously there's more to it, but there are major things, three major things that I wanted to point out. One is appeal now is a matter of right, which means that when something happens in the trial court and the losing party doesn't agree with it, this is in civil court, they can go ahead and file an appeal with the Court of Appeal immediately. Before, they have to petition the Court of Appeal, meaning they have to ask the Court of Appeal, could you please hear me? Could you please hear my appeal? Now, it's a matter of right. Now, that's the biggie. That's why Amber Heard was able to appeal right away the ruling from Judge Escarati to the Court of Appeal because it's her right to do so. Similarly, Johnny Depp had the right to do that. Now, the second big difference with the rule is that because there will be more appellate cases now being heard in Virginia Court of Appeal, the judges were increased from 11 Court of Appeal judges to 17 Court of Appeal judges. So they can go ahead and hear all of those new appellate cases that will be happening. Now, the third thing that I think is very important to emphasize is that the new law revised the appellate rules in Virginia. Now, here's the thing, and it's very important to remember. The rule is still called Supreme Court rules. That's why it could be confusing. It's still called the Supreme Court rules. They didn't change it to Court of Appeals rules, and I don't know why, but it's still the Supreme Court rules. Those are the rules that apply to the Court of Appeals. But here's the thing, the Court of Appeal rules now, based on the January 1st, 2022 new rules, are under Rule 5A. I know right now it seems confusing, just wanted to give you a heads up. This is actually an impromptu video because I wasn't planning to record this video, but because of the gravity and the penalty imposed for actually missing this rule on appeal, I wanted to make sure I pointed out to you, especially since I'll be gone for the next few days for work and seminar, and this is really important to address here. Let me give you a brief background of the appellate procedure happening right now in Johnny Depp and Amber Heard's appeals. On September 23rd, 2022, the record on appeal was filed. What that means is that Judge Escarati's court, the circuit court, actually filed the records from her court for the Court of Appeals. Because if you've seen my other video, I mentioned that with the Court of Appeals, they can only look at the records that are on appeal, hence record on appeal. Anything else that was not included with the record that the circuit court transmitted to the record of appeal do not exist. That's why the record on appeal is very important. The date when the record on appeal was filed is very important because it triggers other dates as well. So September 23rd, 2022 is an important date to remember. What happens after that? According to the rules, 15 days after the record of appeal is filed, the parties have to file a document called an assignment of errors. So Johnny Depp and Amber Heard have to file separately their assignment of errors. Hers. 15 days after September 23rd actually falls on October 8th. And since October 8th is a Saturday, then you generally go to the Monday. And since Monday here in the United States on October 10th was a holiday, was Columbus Day, that's why their assignment of errors were due on October 11th, which was yesterday. So October 11th, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard both filed their separate assignment of errors. What is an assignment of errors? An assignment of errors is a document that the appealing parties file with the appellate court that states clearly and concisely without extraneous argument that identify the specific errors in the rulings below, meaning in the rulings of Judge Ascarati, upon which the party intends to rely. What that basically means is the assignment of error will indicate clearly and concisely what rulings in Judge Ascarati's court that either Johnny Depp or Amber Heard will be contesting, and that's the ruling that they will be relying upon for their appeal. This is a way for the Court of Appeal to see clearly in a very short document what arguments the parties will be relying on for appeal, because you cannot appeal all of the rulings and you cannot just say the entire jury verdict is wrong. Therefore, we need to overturn that. The parties have to specifically point to the Court of Appeals of Virginia what ruling and why they are contesting that ruling to be reversed on appeal. There's also another requirement with the assignment of error. In addition to the requirement that it has to be clear and concise statement of the ruling below that the parties are relying upon. I'll show you that shortly, but first I wanted to show you what Amber Heard filed for her assignment of error. So let's take a look at that. So here is Amber Heard's designation of assignment of error, and she has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, still going 16 arguments that she plans to present to the Court of Appeal. Now, whether or not she will include all of that in her brief, we don't know, but this is what she filed. Don't worry, I'll be discussing Amber Heard's filing in detail more, but I wanted to show you Johnny Depp's filing as well. This is Johnny Depp's assignment of error filing, and he has 1, 2, and 3 issues that he is specifically addressing to the Court of Appeal that he wants reversed or he's contesting. So it's good because there's only 3 issues, and as I mentioned in the Court of Appeals, you want to be specific and you want to just pick and choose your best arguments because the Court of Appeal will not hear everything, and also you have very limited pages for your briefs to argue. The opening brief is only limited to 50 pages. So that means that Johnny Depp will have 50 pages for his 3 main issues on appeal, as opposed to Amber Heard. She will also still have 50 pages for her opening brief, but she has 16 issues to address. So as you can see, the arguments that she will rely on might not be as great if she only has 50 pages for 16 arguments. That's a lot of arguments for appeal. Let's go through Johnny Depp's assignment of error first. Once we go through that, it will be clearer for you once we go over Amber Heard's assignment of error as to what actual mistake Amber Heard did in filing that assignment of error, which ironically is called assignment of error when she also had error in her assignment of error. See what I did there? Looking now at Johnny Depp's assignment of error, we see here, he says, Appellant Johnny C. Depp II, Mr. Depp or plaintiff, by and through his counsel. So let's go to number 1. The trial court erred, meaning had an error, by denying 1. Mr. Depp's motion for summary judgment as to Amber Heard's counterclaim, and Mr. Depp's motion to strike the evidence as to Ms. Heard's counterclaim. And specifically, the evidence evidence that Johnny Depp has issue of is A, subsection A, Mr. Waldman is an independent contractor, not an employee agent, and Mr. Depp is not liable for Mr. Waldman's allegedly tortious conduct as a matter of law. As you recall, Adam Waldman was Johnny Depp's lawyer, and Judge Ascarati ruled that because Adam Waldman actually made that statement, therefore Waldman was an agent of Johnny Depp, and whatever Waldman said was imputed on Johnny Depp. That was Judge Ascarati's ruling. Subsection B, the statements, meaning the counterclaim statements by non-party Adam Waldman that are subject of Ms. Heard's counterclaim are not actionable statements sufficient to support a claim for defamation. Also, subsection C, Ms. Heard failed to present any clear and convincing evidence that Mr. Waldman made the counterclaim statement with actual malice. So here in number 1, we see that Johnny Depp assignment of error, meaning the appeals question or issue that he will present on appeal, is relating to Adam Waldman's statement regarding while he was his lawyer, and that it did not have actual malice. After subsection C, you see that his lawyers wrote preserved, and preserved, that means that they have to preserve whatever the ruling or the court record that is at issue for that argument, the assignment of error argument he had before. So here, they preserved plaintiff's memoranda to sustain the demur, plea and bar to all counterclaims, and they cited the record here, the 6256-74. I assume that's the either file number of the record on appeal that they received from the circuit court to the Court of Appeal, and then the page number as well. And they even explain that this is the motion the parties argued before the trial court on October 16, and then they have a parentheses again, 23262-292, another court record reference and page number, and the trial court denied on January 4th with respect to the 3 statements that ultimately formed the basis for the counterclaim at trial. And then they cited other references there. The reason I took some time actually mentioning those preserved evidence that Johnny Depp's assignment of error pointed out, I know it kind of sounded gibberish and it doesn't make sense, but I pointed it out because it's an important rule. The assignment of errors have an important rule, which is 1, I mentioned earlier, that the parties have to provide in clear and concise argument in which they will identify the specific errors that they want the Court of Appeals to look at and reverse. And the second requirement for assignment of errors is that the parties must identify a clear and exact reference to the pages of the transcript, the written statement of facts, or record where the alleged error occurred. And that's a mandatory requirement to be put on the assignment of error. You can see that in Virginia Supreme Court rules. The second issue in appeal that Johnny Depp is raising is that the trial court erred in refusing Mr. Depp's proposed jury instruction number 22, 23, and 24 as to whether Mr. Waldman was acting as an independent contractor when he made the counterclaim statements. Now this one, Johnny Depp is focusing on the jury instructions that Judge Ascarati denied and did not use, so the jury was not able to look at that language and use it for their deliberation. After number 2, you see Johnny Depp's lawyers again wrote preserved, and then they wrote Mr. Depp's proposed jury instruction numbers 22 to 24, and then in parentheses again they cited the record and page number that it applies to, and then they wrote which the trial court denied on May 20th, 2022, and there's a parentheses again, 26 37727-728, and now that's the reference of the May 20th ruling that they were mentioning about. So there's a lot of numbers, a lot of references, but it's important because it's required by the rules of the Court of Appeal. So as you can see, the rules in Court of Appeals are very specific, very rigid, and very exact. And most of them are very time consuming. Writing that out and even reading it, as you heard, is very time consuming to do. But there's a purpose for each of that rule, and that is to make it easier for the Court of Appeal to find in the voluminous record exactly what evidence from Judge Escarati's court is important for them to look at. Again, the Court of Appeal is not a new trial. They're just focusing on certain issues that are actually appealable. The third issue that Johnny Depp raises says that the trial court erred in excluding from evidence the full, unredacted version of Mr. Depp's exhibit numbers 881A, 881B, and 881C, which are copies of the news articles in which the counterclaim statements appeared. Instead, Judge Escarati only admitted the redacted versions that showed the counterclaim statements out of context. Johnny Depp here is arguing that Judge Escarati should have admitted the entire article where Adam Waldman's statements were stated instead of just showing the specific portion where the three statements that were at issue at trial were located. Because if you only showed the statement by itself and you redact everything else, meaning you black out everything else, it seems that statement was out of context. And I sort of agree, because when you're reading something, you want to see the whole thing to make sure that you're reading it right? You don't want to just focus on one paragraph. What if the paragraph before that actually explains something about that paragraph, or even the paragraph after that says something that explains Adam Waldman's statement? So I'm surprised that Judge Escarati actually just submitted to the jury as evidence just those redacted statements. And here we see that after that, Johnny Depp's lawyers again wrote preserved, and they cited the exhibits that they were contesting that should have been admitted in full, and then they had the parentheses again, 5186-5223, citing to the record, and they explained that which plaintiff argued should be admitted in their entirety, and then they have a parentheses again, a bunch of numbers that are actually referencing the court record where they were arguing that those evidence should have been admitted and shown to the jury. And then the date and the signature, Andrew Crawford was the one who signed this, which means that Andrew Crawford was the one who drafted this assignment of error, which I think is very good. And if you saw our other video about the Johnny Depp's legal team and how we highlighted them, you'll see Andrew Crawford there. And I think he's one of the brains of Johnny Depp team in terms of he's very astute as to rules. He was the one talking about the jury instructions and discussing it with Judge Escarati, also with Sam Moniz. So they're both very particular with the rules. So I see that they follow the rules here, and they're the ones who worked on this. Now that you saw Johnny Depp's assignment of errors, let's look at Amber Heard's assignment of errors. Here, she says, comes now, Appellate Amber Laura Heard by counsel designates the following as her assignment of errors pursuant to Rule 5A25. Now, let's stop there. What is Rule 5A25? Let's take a look at that. Now, let's take a look at what 5A25 says, and it applies to appendix and designations of assignment of error. In subsection D is about determination of contents of appendix and exchange of assignment of error. It says here that within 15 days after the filing of the record with this court, counsel for appellant must file in the office of the clerk of this court a written statement signed by all counsel setting forth an agreed designation of the parts of the record to be included in the appendix. What that means is within 15 days after Judge Judge Escarati's court filed the record with the Court of Appeal, or within 15 days after September 24th, the date I mentioned to you earlier that is critical, the counsel for the appellant, and Johnny Depp is an appellant and Amber Heard is an appellant, so either one or both of them had to file with the Court of Appeal a statement signed by all counsel setting forth their designation of the record on appeal. But that didn't happen. What happens then? Since they couldn't probably agree as to what to designate for the record on appeal. So it says here, in the absence of such an agreement, counsel for appellant must file with the clerk of this court a statement of the assignment of errors and a designation of the contents to be included in the appendix within 15 days after the filing of the record. Well, Amber Heard's assignment of error is referencing this rule. Basically, they're saying, we wrote this assignment of error based on this rule. Well, this rule says that Amber Heard, as the appellant, had to include a statement of the assignment of errors, which she did. We saw that there were 16 of them. But she also had to include a designation of the contents to be included in the appendix, meaning she has to put what designation of evidence or record she wants to put in the appendix. The appendix it includes the court documents from Judge Escarati's court that the Court of Appeal can look at and rely upon for ruling on the assignment of errors that Amber Heard is pointing. But if Amber Heard is focusing on Rule 5A25, she did not include a designation of the contents to be included in the appendix. So she missed that because she only filed the assignment of error. So if you look at Amber Heard's assignments of error, she only listed the 16 errors that she believed Justice Escarati's court made, but nowhere in there did she include a designation of the record in the appendix, or because that's what the rule she's following, as I pointed out. But she didn't also include any preservation of evidence that she's referring to. So you know how I mentioned that in the rules of the Supreme Court in Virginia, which is what's applicable to the Court of Appeals too. I know it says rule for the Supreme Court of Virginia, but that's the same rule that the Court of Appeal is using for them. Even Rule 5A20, the requirements for opening brief, has that same requirements that you have to put an exact reference to the pages of the transcript. And then the rule that Amber Heard is actually referring here also says that she has to designate in her assignment of record the actual record that she's relying on. So basically, you can't just write your assignment of errors and not have a reference to the evidence, which is what she is missing. So for example, number 1, her assignment of error is the trial court erred in declining to dismiss the action on the grounds of forum nonconvenience. That's a jurisdiction argument, and we'll discuss in a separate video what forum nonconvenience is, but just know that that's a jurisdiction argument. She's saying that Judge Escarati's court in Virginia court did not have jurisdiction over this case and should not have been heard. But the thing is, she doesn't even cite what the record of evidence that was needed. So that's missing in her assignment of error. What does that mean? Remember how before I mentioned the rule of 5A20 regarding the requirements for opening brief of appellant? How in that rule, it actually explains more what the assignment of error is. So let's take a look here. In subsection C, as I mentioned earlier, it requires an exact reference to the pages of transcript, written statement of facts, record, or appendix that the assignment of errors or the issues you want the Court of Appeal to look at will refer to the actual record on appeal. As I mentioned and as we saw, Amber Heard's assignment of errors did not include any reference to any record on appeal. No page numbers of the transcripts, no written statement reference, no reference to any particular ruling in terms of the page number and the actual record number. So that's missing. What happens if your assignment of error is insufficient? In subsection C2, it says insufficient assignment of errors. An assignment of error that does not address the findings, rulings, or failures to rule on issues in the trial court or other tribunal from which an appeal is taken, or which merely states that the judgment or award is contrary to the law and the evidence is not sufficient. If the assignment of error is insufficient, the appeal will be dismissed. Let me say that again. If the assignment of error is insufficient, the appeal will be dismissed. So under this rule 5A20, if Amber Heard's assignment of error is insufficient, meaning it doesn't have the citation that's supposed to preserve the records, then her appeal will be dismissed. 5A20 has a harsh rule. But wait, she might have a way out of this. So let's go ahead and take a look at this other rule. This other rule is Rule 5A18. It is about penalties for non-compliance, show cause, and dismissal. In subsection A, the penalty, show cause, and dismissal, this says, this court may dismiss an appeal or impose such other penalties as the Court of Appeal deems appropriate for non-compliance of these rules. So this is the penalty if you don't comply with the rules, because the Court of Appeal is very strict with the rules. You have to comply. I am also very rule-oriented. That's why I love reading these things. I nerd out on these things. So, and then the next sentence says, except as provided in Rule 5A12C 1I and 2 and Rule 5A20C, which is the rule we just talked about earlier about the assignment of errors in opening briefs. So that's why I talked about that rule first before showing you this rule, because that one, the rule about citing assignment of errors in the opening briefs, is very harsh. It says if you don't follow the assignment of errors rule, your appeal will be dismissed. Here in this rule, Rule 5A1A, it says except as provided in that other rule before dismissing an appeal for any defect in the filings related to formatting, curable failure to comply with other requirements, or the failure to meet non-mandatory filing deadlines, this court may issue a show cause order to counsel prescribing a time in which to cure such defect or to otherwise show cause as to why the appeal should not be dismissed or other penalty imposed. What that means is before the Court of Appeal dismisses an appeal because a party failed to comply with the rules about formatting or anything that's curable failure, which means that the party can probably cure this, then the Court of Appeal will set a hearing for an order to show cause, meaning a hearing that will require Amber Heard's appellate attorneys to show up and say why they did not follow the rule. So here, I anticipate the Court of Appeal will set a hearing for Amber Heard's lawyers to explain to them why they did not indicate and preserve the evidence that each of their assignment of errors were actually referring to. So that's what the Court of Appeal will do. And then what Amber Heard's legal team will have to argue in front of the Court of Appeal is why the Court of Appeal should not dismiss their appeal or what other penalty should be imposed against them. So the Court of Appeal could actually be lenient to Amber Heard's appellate attorneys and say, okay, cure that defect, but give us an explanation why you missed that. And one explanation they could give is that this is a new rule. It was implemented in January 1st, 2022, and that they were not familiar with the rules yet, and so there are still learning curve, and appellate lawyers are still figuring out what they should include and not include with certain filings filings with the Court of Appeal. But then again, if you're a seasoned appellate lawyer, which is why Amber Heard hired these new appellate lawyers, because they are supposed to be seasoned appellate lawyers, then they should have known about this rule to begin with. And also, this assignment of error rule has been in place even before January 1st, 2022, but in a different wording, in a different requirement. But the assignment of errors before this new rule was implemented also required the preservation of evidence. And now the new rule still requires the preservation of evidence. So, they should know this. So it might be a tough argument for Amber Heard's appellate team to argue that to the Court of Appeals.
When I was reviewing the edits for this video, I realized I should emphasize why assignment of errors is very important for the Court of Appeals here in Virginia. That is because they consider assignment of errors as a jurisdictional issue. When you hear jurisdictional, you always have to perk up because it's very important. It means that if it's not within the jurisdiction, then the Court of Appeal can dismiss it. That's why the rule is harsh if the assignment of error is not actually in compliance to the rules. Virginia is 1 in 5 states that actually has a binding assignment of error requirement. What that means is that the parties are limited to the statement of assignment of errors that they filed with the Court of Appeal. Those are the only issues that they can appeal. Once they file that statement of assignment of errors, they cannot make any changes whatsoever. Even grammatical errors or typographical errors, they can't make a change anymore. You submit it, that's it. It's irreversible for you to change your assignment of error. According to the Virginia Supreme Court, the chief function of the assignment of errors is to identify with reasonable certainty the error in the lower court that the appellant is relying on, so that the Court of Appeal and the appellee can identify and respond in their brief exactly what ruling is at issue. Because an assignment of error is jurisdictional and serves a very chief function of helping the Court of Appeal and the opposing party identify exactly what they have to respond to, that's why the penalty for not complying with the rules for the assignment of errors is very harsh. As I mentioned in this video, it could include the dismissal of the appeal or an order to show cause as to why that party failed to follow the rules, or any other penalty as the Court of Appeals deems fit.
Now you know why Amber Heard's appeal could potentially be dismissed by the Court of Appeal. That's because her assignment of error does not comply with the Court of Appeal's rules. And the Court of Appeal's rules are very strict. The penalty for not complying is dismissal of your appeal, or a hearing to show cause as to why you did not follow the rules and explain why the court should not dismiss your case. We'll see what happens next. If you want to know what happens next with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard's appeal, please go ahead and subscribe. Let me know too in the comments below if you have any questions about this. I love answering your questions, and if needed, I will make a video to answer your question to make it even better. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you.